A quiet Maryland suburb is rocked by a brutal double murder. To solve this case, investigators must retrace the killer's footsteps. The dead body of a missing girl is found at an Oregon highway rest area. Strange markings on the victim's arm are investigators' best hope of identifying her killer. A Minnesota man finds his estranged wife dead in her home, the apparent victim of a sexual assault. But detectives soon learn that things aren't always what they appear to be. Some crime scenes have few clues to offer, but killers always leave some trace of themselves behind. To make their case, investigators turn to forensic examiners to isolate hidden impressions and turn them into patterns of guilt. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. The affluent suburb of Annapolis, Maryland is a quiet alternative for those looking to escape the hectic pace of Washington, D.C. In this peaceful community, violent crime is almost non-existent. On Monday, May 16, 1994, all of that changed. When prominent D.C. attorneys Jean Gamble and her husband Joseph Thomas failed to show up for work, a secretary asked Ricky Cole, a handyman who did work on the couple's home, to check on them. On the front door, he found a note indicating the couple was away on vacation. But that didn't make sense. This was their vacation home. Cole let himself in with a key the couple had given him.
Hello?
No one appeared to be home. But in the bedroom, he made a horrifying discovery. Underneath the sheets, Jean Gamble and Joseph Thomas lay murdered in their bed. Officers and crime scene technicians from the Anne Arundel County Police Department were quickly dispatched to the scene. Investigators discovered that each victim had suffered a single gunshot wound to the back of the head from point-blank range. Blood was spattered on the wall above the bed. Anne Arundel County Homicide Detective Tim Zawalik was at the scene.
When we saw the crime scene and realized that it was contact wounds and the people were basically executed, it was just such a horrific crime that we knew at that point we were dealing with something that was very, very unusual.
As forensic technicians began scouring the scene for any clues to the killer's identity, investigators found Joseph Thomas's wallet and his wife's purse. Cash and a few credit cards seemed to be missing. The double murder appeared to be a robbery gone wrong. As police continued searching the house, they found no signs of a forced entry.
Just get this mulch right down here. Okay.
But a pile of wood mulch on the floor near the unlocked kitchen door suggested the killer's probable entry point. Hoping the suspect had inadvertently left footprints behind, forensic technicians applied fingerprint powder to the floor. The tactic paid off. A sneaker print was revealed. A gelatin substance was applied to the footprint and allowed to harden, preserving it as evidence. Convinced the killer left the note to keep people away, investigators scoured it for potential clues. The manner in which the date had been written, day first, then month, led them to believe their suspect had served time in the military. Though no usable prints were recovered, tiny brown fibers were removed from the adhesive on the tape. With no witnesses to the double murder and no obvious suspects to pursue, homicide detectives knew this would be a difficult case to solve. And they feared time was working against them.
This person who committed this crime needs to be gotten off the street. If he can do a murder like this so cold and boldly, then this person's going to do it again and again and again, and it's just a scary thought.
The autopsies had a little more information to offer. The levels of rigor mortis led the medical examiner to conclude that the couple had been dead for at least 24 to 36 hours before being discovered. That placed the time of death at late Saturday evening or early Sunday morning. Examiners at the Anne Arundel County Crime Lab believed that the key to the killer's identity lay in the shoe print recovered from the scene. After identifying a New Balance logo on the shoe print, examiners searched through catalogs looking for a model with a similar tread design. They concluded that the print left at the scene had come from a New Balance running shoe, model 480BK, size 7.5. Trying to learn as much about the victims as they could, police began canvassing the neighborhood.
Nobody knows when was the last time you saw the Thomas.
One neighbor described Jean and Joseph as a bright, hard-working, and well-liked couple. She said that she had last seen them Saturday evening as they headed out to dinner in Jean's red Acura. She didn't recall seeing the car the following day and just assumed the couple had decided to drive together back to Washington. To investigators, it seemed more likely that the car had been stolen. An APB was issued for the vehicle. A short while later, a local bank manager who had been following the investigation in the media contacted police. One of the victim's bank cards had been used to withdraw cash from an automated teller machine. The transaction occurred only hours after the couple had been murdered. Though less than 1/3 of all ATMs were equipped with security devices in 1994, this one had a surveillance camera in place. The man was sitting in the driver's seat of Jean Gamble's red Acura.
There you go. Yeah.
Investigators believed they were looking at the face of the couple's killer.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
They worked feverishly to establish his identity. Flyers containing the suspect's photograph were distributed to the public. The publicity paid off. A second bank manager turned over a surveillance tape revealing the same suspect using a credit card belonging to the victims. This second transaction had taken place the day after the murders. And this time, the suspect's shoes were partially visible in the photograph. The photograph was forwarded to the Anne Arundel County Crime Lab. Examiners studied the image in an effort to determine if the shoes worn by the suspect were the same make and model as the shoe that had left the print at the crime scene. Evidence collection supervisor Jeff Cover contacted a shoe designer from New Balance.
And we actually made a trip to the factory in Lawrence, Massachusetts and met with their shoe designer there, and who could identify the outsole in the ATM photograph as a New Balance 480.
It was the same type of shoe that had left the print on the victim's kitchen floor. Believing that robbery was the motive behind the murders, investigators began scouring dozens of burglary reports, hoping to find photographs of known burglars that resembled the murder suspect.
Look at the ATM. Look at his height. This guy can't be that big. He's
But
gotta
they
be
found
well
nothing.
under 6 foot, 5.5 foot at best, probably.
As homicide detectives continued searching through reports, a detective from the burglary division caught a glimpse of the suspect in the ATM photo.
This is the guy we're looking for, right here.
I think it's Scotland Williams.
He recognized the man.
September.
For what?
It was Scotland Williams, a suspect in a string of burglaries, arrested 8 months earlier.
When we got this break, it was the break you dream about having. It was all of a sudden, we've got the guy identified. We had to move fast, and for the first time ever, we had a name to go with the face.
Having physically linked Scotland Williams to the murdered victim's ATM card and their missing vehicle, investigators obtained a warrant for his arrest.
At 6 o'clock, the lead stories on all the news channels was this murder case. Scotland Williams' picture accessing the ATM machine was shown to the public. Our surveillance team was in place, and at 6:05, the front door opened and Scotland Williams was running out the house.
Police moved in and placed him under arrest. Scotland Williams insisted he knew nothing about the murders. Looking to prove otherwise, investigators searched the residence. Inside the house, police found what they were looking for. Several pairs of sneakers, including some New Balance running shoes. They were all size 7.5. A pair of brown cotton gardening gloves was also collected and forwarded to the crime lab. Under questioning, Williams maintained his innocence. And though records indicated he had served 12 years in the military, he insisted the note found on the victim's front door was not his handwriting. Investigators confronted him with the ATM photos.
He admitted it was him at the ATM. When I showed him the picture of him, he looked at the picture and said, "Yeah, that's me." He admitted himself at the ATM, but he never made any other admissions to us. He refused to talk to us.
Investigators looked to forensic examiners to make their case. But the analysis revealed that none of the shoes recovered from Williams' house had left the print found at the crime scene. Police were convinced that Scotland Williams was responsible for the brutal murders of Jean Gamble and her husband, Joseph Thomas. But until they could come up with hard evidence linking him to the crime scene, their suspect would likely get away with murder. Police in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, believed they had arrested the man responsible for the murders of prominent Washington, D.C. attorneys Jean Gamble and her husband, Joseph Thomas. The suspect, Scotland Williams, had been captured on tape using the victim's ATM cards, wearing shoes that were consistent with a print recovered from the crime scene. But none of Williams' shoes recovered during a search of his residence produced a match. Hoping to find something that may have been overlooked, detectives went through every page of Scotland Williams' burglary reports from 8 months earlier. They found the one clue they needed to make their case. Detectives from the burglary division had photographed the soles of Williams' shoes. A Xerox copy of the shoe print was in the file. Using the reference shoe from the manufacturer as a point of comparison, evidence technician Eric Love first determined that the shoe print in the Xerox copy had been made by a New Balance model 480 BK, size 7.5. Next, he compared the unique wear patterns and nicks on the sole of the shoe print from the crime scene to those present in the Xerox copy of Scotland Williams' shoe. All of the unique characteristics matched. For evidence technician Eric Love, the evidence was overwhelming.
We knew that Scotland Williams owned a pair of model 480 from the Xerox. We also knew that Scotland Williams was wearing a shoe that was consistent with a model 480 BK the day after the murders. So by analyzing all this evidence, we were able to conclude that indeed Scotland Williams had a pair of 480 BKs, that that type of shoe was found at the crime scene, and that the Xerox of Scotland Williams' shoe was consistent with that found at the crime scene.
If any doubt about Williams' guilt remained, further analysis erased it. Examiners concluded that the brown fibers recovered from the adhesive tape on the note attached to the victim's front door were consistent with fibers from the gardening gloves found in Williams' home. Police believe Williams entered the victim's residence with the intention of burglarizing the house. But when he discovered Gene Gamble and Joseph Thomas sleeping, he pulled out his gun and shot them. He made off with cash and an ATM card, unaware that he had left behind a clue that would lead police right to him. Scotland Williams was tried and convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole, plus 70 years. Scotland Williams killed his victims as they lay in their own bed. But for some murderers, the first step is to get the victim as far away from home as possible. On June 17, 1986, a passing motorist traveling along Highway 97 in Klamath Falls, Oregon, spotted something lying beside the road. It was a sleeping bag, and it seemed to be in good condition. But when he looked inside, he found items that appeared to be blood-stained. Concerned, the motorist collected the items and took them to the Klamath Falls station of the Oregon State Police. There, detectives began searching the bag. They discovered some items of clothing, a pair of white-winged tennis shoes, a woman's purse, and duct tape attached to green paper towels. All of the items appeared to be blood-stained. Inside the purse, investigators found identification belonging to a 20-year-old woman named Carrie Love. To Detective Kenneth Cooper, the items suggested foul play.
It was obvious that we had a female that was missing or possibly a homicide because of the amount of blood on the tennis shoes and in the sleeping bag itself. And the wad of paper towels had duct tape in different layers on it. And when I started opening the paper towels, I noticed clear indentation of what I thought was a nose and the chin area. And it appeared that the paper towels were put on the face.
Other items found inside the purse indicated Carrie Love worked for Northern Star Trucking Company, located more than 400 miles away in Seattle, Washington. Detectives contacted the company and learned that Carrie had recently left on a business trip from Seattle to Los Angeles with the company's owner, 42-year-old Jesse Pratt.
Have you heard from him recently?
They were traveling in his 18-wheeler,
When do you
and their
expect to hear
route
from
would
him?
have put them passing through Klamath Falls.
All right.
The information, along with the blood-stained items found along the highway, led investigators to fear the worst. They decided to return to Highway 97, but now they believed they were looking for Carrie Love's body. For 3 hours, the search turned up nothing. And with the vast stretch of highway and the dozens of rest areas, Carrie Love could be anywhere. But then, Detective Cooper remembered one isolated spot in particular, the Chelmut rest area.
There's no facilities there. It's totally unlit. It's behind a full wall of trees. It's totally secluded, And at night, it's absolutely pitch black. And that would be an ideal place to pull a body and cover him up with the gravel.
When the detective arrived at the location, he realized his instincts had been dead on. Partially buried underneath a pile of gravel lay the lifeless body of a young woman. For investigators, there was no doubt that Carrie Love had been found. Blood-stained items found along a highway in Klamath Falls, Oregon, led police to the body of 20-year-old Carrie Love, an employee of a Seattle trucking company who disappeared while traveling to Los Angeles on business with her boss. And the evidence suggested her death had been a brutal one. She had been stabbed repeatedly. Her crushed head and torso indicated she had been run over by a large vehicle. Strange bruises on her arm appeared to be tire tracks. Detectives meticulously documented and collected every scrap of evidence. Seeing the young woman so brutalized only intensified Detective Kenneth Cooper's resolve to see that her killer was brought to justice.
When you run into something that bad, it's hard not to get personal. It's important that you do everything correct. Because at this point, you know beyond any doubt, if you don't do it perfect, you could lose it in court. And you can't afford to do that. Because at that point, we become this person's mouthpiece. We're the ones that's going to scream justice for her because she's unable to at this point.
At autopsy, the medical examiner determined that Carrie had been asphyxiated, then stabbed 12 times before being run over. The stab wounds were consistent with those caused by an ice pick or a knitting needle. She had also been raped, though no usable biological evidence was recovered. Other than the tread impressions, the only clues to the killer's identity were some red cotton fibers found in the victim's hands.
The day I dropped her off.
As word of Carrie's murder spread through her hometown of Seattle, her boyfriend came in to speak with police there. He believed that Carrie's boss, 42-year-old Jesse Pratt, had something to do with the murder. He said Pratt had a strange fixation with Carrie. In fact, a month earlier, he and Carrie attended a high school prom together. As they were leaving, the boyfriend spotted Jesse Pratt sitting in his car across the street. He was just watching them. The boyfriend confirmed that the last time he saw Carrie was when she and Pratt left the Northern Star Trucking Company heading to Los Angeles. That was 2 days before Carrie's body was discovered in Oregon. Seattle police began trying to locate Jesse Pratt, the last person seen with Carrie Love. The receptionist at Northern Star Trucking had not heard from her boss since he left for Los Angeles a few days earlier. As the questioning continued, a call came in.
This is Mona. Hey, Jesse.
It was Jesse
Listen,
Pratt.
The detective's here and he's asking. Carrie's missing. Sure, just 1 second. It's
Jesse.
Seeming eager to cooperate, he told police he and Carrie had left Seattle together on June 16th.
Now,
But an hour or so after leaving, she decided she wanted to fly to Los Angeles instead.
all right, when are you coming back to?
He believed she became uncomfortable being with him after the two had consensual sex. Pratt said he drove her to the Seattle airport and continued on to Los Angeles. He said he was currently in Phoenix, Arizona, making a delivery, but he would be back in Seattle the following day. But police didn't want to wait. An APB was issued for his rig. A few hours later, Arizona authorities spotted the 18-wheeler just outside of Phoenix. When Jesse Pratt could not provide a valid trucker's license, police took him into custody. His truck was impounded for a thorough examination. Oregon State Police detectives flew to Arizona to question Pratt themselves. By the time they arrived, however, Pratt had hired an attorney, and he advised his client not to answer any questions. Insisting he had nothing to hide, Pratt consented to giving police his red T-shirt for a closer examination. As he removed his shirt, they observed and photographed several suspicious scratches around his ribs. Convinced the injuries had been caused during a struggle, police searched Pratt's truck for signs of violence. Inside the cab, they recovered a briefcase, some duct tape, and a roll of unopened green paper towels, similar to the ones found with the victim's belongings along Highway 97. Forensic technicians also examined the tires of Pratt's rig. Though the treads didn't appear to resemble the bruising found on the victim's arm, the tires were removed and stored as possible evidence. For Detective Sergeant Richard Stroop of the Oregon State Police, the search of Pratt's truck had failed to produce evidence of murder.
Interestingly, the truck itself did not provide us with any significant evidence, and I think that in and of itself was significant, at least to me, because it was very obvious this thing had been cleaned. It was spotless. There was no forensic evidence found in the vehicle, and you would have expected to see something there. So obviously, it was obvious to us that Jesse Pratt had cleaned that truck out pretty thoroughly.
Investigators scrutinized the contents of Pratt's briefcase. They found a potential clue, a gas receipt from a truck stop located 100 miles south of the Seattle airport. The receipt was dated the evening of June 16th, 2 days before Carrie Love's body was found. Perhaps someone there remembered seeing Pratt. The attendant who worked that evening was shown a photo lineup and asked if anyone looked familiar. Without hesitation, he pointed to Jesse Pratt.
Yes, sir.
The attendant remembered him well.
Without a doubt.
What stuck out in his mind was the mismatch between Pratt's unkempt appearance and that of the attractive young woman traveling with him. They had stopped to fill up. The young woman asked about using the restroom, but the driver seemed to be in a hurry, yelling at her to hurry up. The attendant remembered feeling that the two seemed like an odd pair. When asked if he could identify the woman traveling with Pratt, he picked out Carrie Love. Investigators knew that Pratt could not have dropped Carrie off at the Seattle airport as he previously claimed. Jesse Pratt had been caught in a lie. At the crime lab, examiners compared fibers from Pratt's red T-shirt with those recovered from Carrie Love at autopsy. The shape, color, and texture of the fibers were all consistent. Though the case was largely circumstantial, a jury found Jesse Pratt guilty of first-degree murder. But this case was far from over. In January 1990, Pratt's conviction was overturned on appeal, and a new trial was ordered. Oregon State Police wasted no time preparing for the next trial.
Now that's the actual tire that we think ran over it, right?
They were determined to present the new jury with a bulletproof case.
Inside of the truck, we couldn't
And the best way to do that was to prove that the strange bruises found on the victim's arm had come from the tires of Pratt's 18-wheeler. Photographs of Carrie Love's injuries and inked impressions of Pratt's tires were forwarded to renowned tire tread expert Pete McDonald in Hudson, Ohio. First, he confirmed the contusions on the victim's arm had been made by a tire, but not from the outer tread. The marks, which appeared as bars on the victim's arm, had come from design patterns located on the side of the tire. And all of the bars were the same size and shape except one. For McDonald, that was a telltale sign that the tire he was looking for had been retreaded. The contusions on the victim's arm captured the exact spot where the old tread had been spliced with the new one. Looking for a match, he traveled to the Oregon Crime Lab to view the evidence himself. After viewing the side design patterns of all 18 wheels, McDonald believed the right rearmost tire, which had been retreaded, looked the most consistent with the injuries found on Carrie Love's arm. Using carbon paper, he traced the tire, creating an exact reproduction for later comparisons. McDonald measured the unique bar patterns from the tire and compared it with photographs taken to scale of the injuries. All of the dimensions matched. Next, McDonald created a model that would help the new jury understand how an 18-wheel truck could run over a person with only one tire.
I made a little model of the victim's body to scale with this tractor trailer. And then I moved the tractor trailer, and as you can see, this right rear tire, and only the right rear tire, is making the imprint. And now the inside of that tire is coming across the inside of the victim's arm.
Still, McDonald knew from experience that his analysis was not foolproof. He contacted the manufacturer of the retreaded tire for specific information.
Whenever I end up going into court, I find that the defense attorney is going to logically say, well, you identified this tire imprint, but there are millions of these tires out there. I called this manager, and he informed me that there were very few tires, like 300 of this brand, and only about 100 of this actual size.
The manager discovered he still had the bill of sale for the retreaded tire that had run over Carrie Love. Northern Star Trucking had purchased it. Ironically, the check for the tire had been signed by Carrie Love herself, just a few weeks before she was murdered. Police believe that as Pratt and Carrie passed through Klamath Falls, Oregon on the way to Los Angeles, he pulled off the road at a rest area and made sexual advances toward Carrie. When Carrie resisted, Pratt raped and killed her, then buried her underneath the gravel and drove his truck over her body. The jury found Jesse Pratt guilty of aggravated murder. On April 16, 1991, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. All of his subsequent appeals have been denied. Jesse Pratt believed that burying his victim would conceal his crime. But others will manipulate the crime scene itself, hoping to send investigators in the wrong direction. St. Paul, Minnesota, March 20th, 1996. An early morning 911 call brought police from the St. Paul Police Department to the home of 31-year-old Stacy Brown. Stacy's estranged husband had stopped by the house and discovered his wife dead on the couch. She had been brutally beaten and strangled to death. The position of her body on the couch and the fact that she was nude from the waist down suggested she had also been sexually assaulted. While examining the body, homicide detective Keith Mortensen found a strange clue. There were odd-shaped contusions and bruising on the inside of the victim's leg.
I thought that it was an odd location for a bruise, for someone to normally get a bruise. Typically, I think if you get a bruise, it's on the shin area or on the front of your leg, sometimes on the side from bumping into something, but more unusual to get it on the inside of the leg.
Though Stacy appeared to be the victim of a sex crime, a closer examination of the scene led investigators to have some doubts.
One of her legs was up on the arm of the couch, yet there was a coffee table there with a number of items on it which were undisturbed. Her underwear were on the floor at the base or kind of by her right foot, and again it didn't appear to be in the position that it would be if someone were attacking her sexually.
Investigators now had to consider that this crime scene had been staged in an effort to conceal the real motive behind the murder. They hoped an autopsy could tell them more. Police in St. Paul, Minnesota had no doubts that 31-year-old Stacy Brown had been brutally murdered in her home. But a closer examination suggested her killer had staged the crime scene in an effort to make her death appear to be the result of a violent sexual assault. At autopsy, the medical examiner concluded that Stacy had died as a result of asphyxiation. She had been strangled with a telephone cord and a wire hanger. And despite the fact that Stacy had been found nude from the waist down, he found no physical evidence that she had been sexually assaulted. He was also unable to explain the source of strange bruising found on Stacy's leg. Convinced the crime scene had been staged to throw investigators off the killer's trail, police believed the suspect would be someone close to the victim. 34-year-old Lewis Brown, Stacy's estranged husband, and the man who discovered her body, was brought in for questioning. He was devastated that Stacy was gone. Brown, who wears leg braces as a result of childhood polio, stated that he dropped by the house early that morning to drop off presents he bought for his youngest daughter. When he noticed the keys dangling in the front door, he made his way inside. That's when he discovered his wife dead on the couch.
Well, I just dropped my kids off.
Brown realized that his impending divorce made him a logical suspect. But he insisted he still loved Stacy, his wife of 8 years and the mother of his 3 children. On the night that she was murdered, Brown said he was at a local bar playing pool until going home around 1 a.m. He could think of only one person who would want to hurt his wife, a man involved with Stacy's best friend, Rebecca. Rebecca was contacted, and she agreed to an interview. She admitted that her boyfriend, Quan Tran, and Stacy had not gotten along. Stacy felt Tran was abusive and had urged Rebecca to end the relationship. But Tran became enraged by Stacy's meddling. A few days before the murder, he had smashed out the windows of Stacy's car. And later that same evening, there was another incident. A piece of a brick suddenly came crashing through the window of Stacy's house as she and Rebecca ate dinner. Attached was a frightening message written in broken English apparently from Tran. The message threatened Stacy's life and warned her to stay out of Tran and Rebecca's business. Stacy had reported the incident and gave police the brick and the letter. Despite Tran's temper, Rebecca didn't believe he was capable of murder. Police felt otherwise.
Quan Tran was considered a suspect in the breaking of the porch window, as he had just been there and broken out some windows on a car. It also left him as a suspect in the murder case as well, because of the involvement. If we could link the other two incidents together, then maybe we can link him to the murder as well.
I did throw the brick.
Tran was picked up and brought to the police station.
I didn't do it, you know.
Under questioning, he admitted smashing the victim's car out of anger, but he adamantly denied throwing a brick through her porch window.
I didn't do it. Yes.
He also denied any knowledge of Stacy's murder. But investigators noticed scratches on his hands. And on the sleeve of his jacket, there were stains that appeared to be blood.
That was from my hand when I wiped it.
Is it your blood?
He claimed he had injured himself at work.
No.
Officer, would you take mine?
Police took the jacket and forwarded it to the crime lab.
Okay. You should take this bag,
He was also asked to provide a handwriting sample.
and I'm gonna tell you something to write. Don't disguise it. Just write it.
Mr. Tran didn't know exactly why we suspected him, other than that we explained to him that he had been to the victim's home and he had broken out windows there, and that the next incident that happened was another broken-in window, and then the next incident that happened was a murder.
Though the evidence was pointing to Tran as the suspect, he believed he was being framed for Stacy's murder. Crime lab analysis of the evidence seemed to support his claims of innocence. Handwriting analysis revealed that Tran had not written the threatening letter to Stacy. And DNA testing of the bloodstains found on his jacket proved that the blood had not come from the victim. The investigation had hit a dead end. Police were back where they had started, with a dead body and no solid suspects. Police in St. Paul, Minnesota struggled to identify a suspect in the murder of Stacy Brown, a 31-year-old mother of 3. Feeling something may have been overlooked, police began re-examining all their evidence, including statements made by the victim's estranged husband, 34-year-old Lewis Brown. Brown had claimed that on the night of the murder, he went to a local bar and played pool until 1 a.m. To corroborate the alibi, police decided to go to the bar. There, employees who had worked the night of Stacy's murder were shown photographs of Lewis Brown.
I'm looking for an individual, this individual here.
No one recognized the man, and they felt certain they would have remembered him.
They stated that they had very few Asian customers and that they would have definitely noticed someone with a marked limp who was wearing braces on their legs.
Though the information hardly proved that Brown was a killer, it suggested he had lied to police about his whereabouts the night of the murder. To learn more, police visited the facility where Brown was employed as an alarm technician for the St. Paul school system. Investigators asked his supervisor to look around Brown's workstation. There, the detective noticed and collected pens and a yellow writing pad, which looked consistent with the note attached to the brick that had been thrown through the victim's window. As the detective made his way out of the building, he spotted a broken piece of a brick being used as a paperweight to hold down some newspapers. He took it on the remote chance it was from the same brick thrown through Stacy's window. When the edges of the two broken pieces were lined up, Detective Mortensen was astonished to find a perfect fit. Louis Brown, not Quan Tran, had thrown the brick with a note written in broken English through his wife's window. Though Brown's efforts to frame Tran had backfired, police still lacked hard evidence linking him to the murder scene. They obtained a warrant to search his house. Brown's roommate led police to the suspect's bedroom. There, investigators found a few articles of clothing that appeared to be bloodstained. As the search continued, detectives noticed several leg braces scattered around the room. All of the items were collected.
We need to take this leg brace off.
Detective Mortensen forwarded the evidence to the Ramsey County Medical Examiner for analysis. There, Dr. Michael McGee worked the case. After reviewing the autopsy photos, he believed that identifying the source of the bruises on Stacy's leg would be the key to exposing her killer's identity.
It had a peculiar appearance to it. It was a broken line separated by gaps or spaces that were fairly even. And if you looked at it, you could tell it was caused by some type of object that was machined and had certain dimensions to it.
Dr. McGee, this just came in from St. Paul.
Then, Dr. McGee learned from police that the prime suspect, Louis Brown, wore leg braces. He began analyzing all of the braces collected from the suspect's bedroom. One in particular caught his attention. It contained a knee support with an L-shaped hinge. Dr. McGee superimposed the hinge of the leg brace directly on top of a photograph of the wound.
The brace in the open position matches exactly with the abrasion and injury that's present. The opened edges of the hinge are responsible for the area of abraded tissue present on the subject's leg. The spaces in the part of the mechanism here are responsible for the clear spaces present on the injury. The bruise that extends in an upward L fashion is due to the smooth aluminum strut.
The only way the leg brace could have caused the injury to Stacy's leg was if the person wearing it had been directly on top of her. Louis Brown was the only person known to have worn those braces. He was arrested and charged with the murder of his estranged wife.
I used to live here.
Police theorized that on the evening of March 19th, an argument between Louis and Stacy turned violent. After strangling his wife, he staged the scene to look like a sexual assault in an effort to throw investigators off his trail. But all the while, his leg brace had pressed down on her leg. On January 31st, 1998, a jury found Louis Brown guilty of murder. A few days later, he was sentenced to life in prison. When leaving the scene of a murder, most killers believe they have successfully covered their tracks. But no matter how hard they try, clues to their identity always remain. Forensic examiners can uncover hidden prints and impressions and expose patterns of guilt. Police in Central California find themselves in the midst of a violent crime wave. At first, the deaths appear unrelated.
This is it.
But detectives uncover evidence that points to a single killer. In Virginia, women start turning up dead in their own homes. And it appears a sadistic serial killer is to blame. But until police can identify a suspect, they remain powerless to stop him. When there is no obvious connection between victim and killer, solving a murder can be difficult. But forensic experts can play a vital role in exposing the predator who chooses random targets. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. California's central coastline is famous for its rugged beauty and isolation. But in the early 1980s, the city of Santa Cruz became the backdrop for a series of violent crimes. On April 23rd, rescue workers and police from the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office responded to a call about a vehicle found burning along a rural mountain road. The car had been burning for hours and was completely destroyed. To authorities, it appeared to be the work of vandals. But a closer inspection revealed a much more gruesome act than arson. A human body, burnt beyond recognition, lay in the front seat. The unidentified victim was removed from the burned-out wreckage and transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. Investigators began searching for clues to explain the fire. But they found none of the telltale signs suggesting that an accident or engine trouble were to blame. A check on the tags revealed the car was registered to 20-year-old Mark Farrell, who listed an address less than a mile from the scene.
1 Frank John Mary.
Detective Sergeant David Deverell oversaw the investigation. The lack of an obvious cause of the fire was troubling.
There was no reason for the car to have caught fire. There was no dynamic crash. It's very unusual to have, a body burnt up in a vehicle with no explanation as to how it happens.
Police hoped the autopsy would yield more answers.
This is Farrell.
With Detective Deverell present, forensic pathologist Dr. Richard Mason began his examination by x-raying the victim. After reviewing the results, it was clear this death was no accident.
I could see evidence of at least 3, possibly 4 bullet pathways through the chest, entering on the right and exiting on the left. There was also a very probable gunshot wound to the head.
The young male victim had been murdered. But the heat of the fire had destroyed any ballistics evidence that may have been left behind. But then, embedded in the young man's chest, Dr. Mason found a single bullet that had somehow survived the intense heat. Dr. Mason, a gun enthusiast, analyzed the fragment under a microscope. It was a unique bullet.
I'm a longtime handgun rifle shooter, and I recognized it immediately as a .38 special wad cutter. They are heavy, they're very penetrative, and they will drill deeply into a body.
Dental records later confirmed that the murder victim was in fact the owner of the burned out car, 20-year-old Mark Farrell. Now, police had to find out who had killed him and why. Investigators questioned the young man's mother. She couldn't imagine why anyone would have wanted to harm her son. She said she last saw him the previous afternoon. Mark, a college student studying to be an engineer, was late for the night shift where he worked as an analyst at a nearby electronics plant. There didn't seem to be anything that was troubling him. Mark was well liked by everyone who knew him. He didn't have any enemies. With no obvious suspects, police looked to reconstruct the last hours of Mark Farrell's life. His employer confirmed that Mark had worked his entire shift the night before and left around 2 a.m. There were no indications that anything out of the ordinary had happened during his shift. And he said Mark got along well with all of his co-workers. The manager handed over the videotape from the company's security camera. At the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office, Detective Deverell reviewed the tapes. He watched as Mark Farrell left work without incident.
In looking at the tape, there was certainly nothing unusual in it. Looked like, it was the end of the night. He was headed home. There was absolutely nothing in it.
Weeks passed with no additional leads. Soon, the investigation turned cold. And the caseload for Santa Cruz homicide detectives was about to increase. 2 months after the murder of Mark Farrell, the tranquility of the nearby community of Laguna Beach was shattered. The lifeless bodies of 2 men were discovered on the beach. Officers and crime scene technicians were dispatched to the scene.
Right.
There, they found 2 young Asian men who had both been shot in the back multiple times. Police began processing the scene for clues. In the breast pocket of one of the victims, they found a wallet.
All right. See anything else? Or?
I don't. That's good. I got the shot. We can put him back down and
okay.
We'll check the wallet for ID.
Okay.
And inside was identification belonging to a man named Check Chin, a resident of San Francisco. Police could find no ID on the second victim.
Craig, is it okay if I come in from this angle here? Right.
His wallet was missing.
It looks like he's got a set of keys.
However, they located a set of car keys. Detectives theorized the double murder was the result of a robbery gone bad. Using the set of keys, police were able to locate the victim's car.
Let's get the distance between 2.
Based on the vehicle registration, they believed that the second victim was the car's owner, 30-year-old Han Lee, also from San Francisco.
Looks pretty good. So we'll get Dave in here and let him know what we're going to
looking there?
As police began looking for clues to the killer's identity, they noticed one empty spot in the nearby parking lot. And in the space were fresh tire tracks.
Yeah, so we'll catch this guy and...
Unsure if the killer had left the marks, crime scene technicians collected the evidence using a plaster cast mold. The nature of the double murder troubled police.
It was a really unusual scene for us. We had 2 bodies up here on the trail. Multiple homicide is certainly something we don't see. It's something that concerned us greatly.
The victims' bodies were transported to the coroner's office for autopsy. Again, Dr. Richard Mason worked the case.
Sure. This, when you're done with the overviews, while he's in a position, we'll get the ID shot.
He extracted the fatal bullets from the victims' backs. He had seen them before. They were unique .38 caliber wad cutters, identical to the bullet recovered from the body of Mark Farrell 2 months earlier. Police now had 3 unsolved murders on their hands, and it appeared the same gun had been used in all of the homicides. Dr. Mason and Detective Deverell realized it was too much of a coincidence to be ignored.
It's an unusual gun.
Police in Santa Cruz, California had 3 unsolved homicides on their hands. And the bullets recovered from all of the victims appeared to have originated from the same gun. To find out, the bullets were forwarded to ballistics expert Paul Doherty at the San Mateo Police Crime Lab. From the size and diameter, he confirmed that all were .38 caliber wad cutter bullets. Typically, wad cutters are used for target shooting.
A wad cutter is a projectile that's designed to punch a hole in paper for target shooting. So you get a nice clean hole so you can measure your accuracy of your score. In other words, in some cases when you get right on the line, you want to make sure you're cut. If you've cut the line, the score goes higher, and that's what this does. It just cuts a nice clean hole.
Each gun leaves unique markings on a bullet as it travels through the barrel. When examiners compared the bullet recovered from 20-year-old Mark Farrell to the ones taken from the 2 Asian victims found at Laguna Beach, they found that all shared the same characteristics. And after extensive research, authorities determined that the markings left on the bullets had likely been produced by a rare Great Western single-action revolver.
Manufacturer and see if we can't get somewhere with that. Although it becomes a little problematic when you start looking.
It was a promising lead, but it was nearly impossible for police to track down everyone who currently owned the handgun.
I don't think it's a standard manufacturer.
And though it seemed unlikely, Detective Dave Deverell had to consider that the 3 murders were unconnected.
Between that and the gun, you get there. You look at it and go, well, maybe the gun got passed from one person to another, and there really is no connection between the cases. That didn't work for any of us. It just didn't make sense that a gun and bullets would somehow transfer from one person to another and be used again in another homicide.
To find out if there was a connection, detectives traveled to San Francisco's Chinatown district, where the 2 Laguna Beach victims, Han Lee and Chek Chin, had lived. It's a notoriously insulated community, and investigators realized that getting information would not be easy. A team from the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office worked the case. Homicide Detective Joe Hennard uncovered a possible lead.
We had information that both victims had worked at the Golden Dragon restaurant in Chinatown, where 2 years prior there was a gangland shooting where a number of people were murdered. We were concerned that there could have been gang activity, that these guys were followed down to Santa Cruz and were shot and killed on the way over to the beach.
Interpreter, Mr. Liu.
Through an interpreter from the San Francisco Police Department's Asian Gang Task Force, the manager of the restaurant described the 2 young men as decent, hard-working employees. In fact, he last saw them the day before they were found murdered. It was payday, and the men were anxious to receive their checks. They had made plans to take a day trip down to Laguna Beach. The manager didn't believe the two men were involved in any gang activity. He could think of no one who would have wanted to harm them. Having found no connection between the victims, detectives realized they were powerless to prevent more killings.
We got a photo of our...
Soon, the investigation into the murders of Mark Farrell, Chek Chin, and Han Lee had hit a dead end.
The case was very frustrating. We had the bullets linking the murders. We knew what type of gun we were looking for. We had a lot of evidence in the case, but we didn't have even a glimmer of why these three people were killed.
But a year and a half later, all of that changed. A man named Dave Bonin contacted police. His daughter, Lynn, he said, was in great danger. She had recently broken up with her boyfriend, Mark Cunningham, and now he was stalking her. The daughter feared for her life. Mark Cunningham had allegedly bragged about killing 3 men a year and a half earlier.
Okay, thanks.
It was the break police had been waiting for. The father took them to speak with Lynn at the grocery store where she worked. His daughter was afraid to speak to police about Cunningham, so he offered to bring her out of the store. But there was just one complication. Mark Cunningham was there, talking to Lynn. Dave Bonin got his daughter's attention and brought her outside. When Detective Dave Deverell heard the suspect was inside, he quickly interviewed Lynn.
And kind of did just the quickest interview on record. You know, we kind of went, Lynn, your dad tells us that your boyfriend may have killed some people, and we need to know what happened.
Lynn told police that a year and a half earlier, she and Mark Cunningham were driving around near Laguna Beach. Suddenly, Mark pulled into a parking spot, claiming he needed cash. He said he'd be right back, but he wouldn't tell her where he was going. Lynn told police he was gone for several minutes. She recalled that when he returned, he was agitated and out of breath. She thought she saw a gun in his possession. Police realized it was the same spot where the 2 Asian men were found murdered.
It became apparent to us in this real brief interview with Lynn, Mark was the guy we were looking for.
As Lynn finished telling her story, Mark Cunningham exited the store. In a wide-open parking lot, there was any number of ways the suspect could escape. And if Mark Cunningham was in fact the killer, police feared he would not hesitate to use violence. After a year and a half, police in Santa Cruz, California finally had a solid lead in 3 unsolved homicides. Mark Cunningham had allegedly bragged to his ex-girlfriend that he was responsible for the shooting deaths. Cunningham was cooperative and taken into custody without incident.
right, what is this for? I tell you, it's a good style.
Under
Mark,
questioning, he insisted he knew nothing about any of the murders.
I'm sorry, I really...
He claimed that his girlfriend, Lynn Bonin, was trying to get back at him for ending the relationship. He denied owning a Great Western single-action revolver, the type of weapon used in the 3 killings. Police didn't believe him, but they had no hard evidence to prove he was lying. Still, Cunningham remained in police custody. When a few days passed with no additional leads, police turned to his ex-girlfriend for more information. Lynn Bonin had reason to believe that Cunningham had committed the murders.
You just threw it over.
She said that a few days after the 2 men were found murdered at Laguna Beach, Cunningham admitted to the crimes.
What are you going to do about it? Come here.
Then, without warning, he pulled out an old revolver and forced Lynn to the ground. He threatened to kill her and her father if she ever said anything to police. A short while later, Cunningham got rid of the revolver.
You just told me to sit there and wait.
Lynn didn't know anything about Mark Farrell, the 20-year-old man who had been shot and burned in his car along a mountain road.
At some point, did Mark leave?
I don't know.
However, in the past, she and Cunningham and some friends would hang out on that road and have bonfires. Cunningham would often brandish his weapon at passers-by who complained about the illegal fires. Police had strong circumstantial evidence linking Mark Cunningham to the scenes where all 3 victims had been found murdered. Now they needed hard evidence. They turned to the tire tread marks found at Laguna Beach nearly 2 years earlier. The tires from the truck that had been driven at the time of the murders had been sold, but police were able to track down the current owners. The tires were collected and forwarded to the crime lab for analysis. First, examiners generated an inked impression of Cunningham's tire treads. Then, transparent overlays were placed on top of life-size photographs of the tire tread found at Laguna Beach nearly 2 years earlier. They found that all of the class characteristics, including the shape, size, and dimensions of the tread design, lined up perfectly. The evidence had placed Mark Cunningham's vehicle at the scene of the double murder. But to tie him to all 3 homicides, they needed to find the murder weapon. Lynn Bonin agreed to help. She brought investigators to the area where she believed the gun had been tossed. It appeared to be a waste of time. But then, buried under dirt and debris, they found a pistol. It was a rare Great Western single-action revolver. To prove it was the murder weapon, police forwarded the evidence to forensic examiners. Ballistics expert Paul Doherty knew it would not be easy. Rust had severely damaged the weapon. But after days of cleaning the revolver, he was able to get the gun to fire.
3, 2, 1, fire. Firing.
Ballistics tests proved that the gun was used in both the Laguna Beach murders and the death of 20-year-old Mark Farrell. Cunningham was subsequently charged with 3 counts of murder. Police theorized that Cunningham had started a small bonfire by the side of the road. Mark Farrell, headed home after a long night of work, saw the flames and stopped to find out what was going on. Without warning, Cunningham pulled his gun and shot the young man several times. In an effort to cover his tracks, Cunningham then doused the car with a flammable substance, then set the vehicle on fire. It was a crime of opportunity, one the killer would repeat several weeks later at Laguna Beach. Mark Cunningham was tried and convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Mark Cunningham preyed on victims who happened to cross his path. But in Richmond, Virginia, one killer carefully looked for targets that shared something in common. On the morning of September 19th, 1987, a man noticed a car with its engine running pulled up onto the sidewalk. It appeared the vehicle had been abandoned. The man called police. 911 dispatchers ran a check on the tags and learned the car was registered to a woman who lived a few blocks away from where the vehicle was found. But when efforts to contact her failed, police tracked down her landlord. An officer was dispatched to the residence. The landlord was also concerned. She had noticed a missing window screen and feared the place had been burglarized. Not knowing what to expect, the officer cautiously made his way through the apartment. In the bedroom, he made a gruesome discovery. A woman lay dead.
Dispatch, come back.
She had been tied up and strangled. Within minutes, Richmond police and crime scene technicians were dispatched to the scene. The woman, found fully clothed, was identified as 35-year-old Donna Doyle.
Still there, yeah.
No items appear to be missing. Robbery was not the motive behind the murder. Believing the killer had gained access to the residence through the window, technicians scoured the area for prints. But they found nothing. And the victim's car, which had likely been taken by the killer and then abandoned, yielded no additional clues. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the death had resulted from ligature strangulation. The device had been fashioned from a sock, shoestring, and vacuum cleaner pipe. Donna Doyle had been slowly strangled. Though the victim was clothed in cut-off jeans and a shirt, there were indications she had been sexually assaulted. Biological evidence of rape and some stray hairs were collected. At the time, DNA testing was in its infancy, and all serologists could determine was that the killer had type O blood. Homicide Detective Ray Williams was assigned the case. He realized this investigation would not be simple.
I worked homicide for 20-some odd years in the city, and after looking and reviewing the scene, I knew it to be a very unusual homicide. The way she was tied and strangled was very apparent to me that at that point we weren't dealing with an ordinary killer.
Hoping for more detailed information, the hairs recovered from Donna Doyle's body were forwarded to forensic experts at the Virginia Division of Forensic Science. They determined that 2 of the hairs had not originated from the victim. And from their texture and cross-sectional shape, examiners concluded they had come from an African-American male. For investigators, it wasn't much to go on. To learn more, detectives questioned the employer of a local bookstore where Donna Doyle worked. On the day of the murder, Donna had worked her regular shift. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened that day. She described Donna as a dedicated employee and a very likable person, although she was somewhat shy. After closing the store, Donna headed home. Her employer didn't know if she had plans that night. She believed that Donna lived alone and was unaware if she currently had a boyfriend. After 2 weeks, detectives had no luck identifying a suspect or an obvious motive. The investigation into Donna Doyle's murder was going nowhere. Then, emergency dispatchers received a 911 call. There had been another homicide. As police in Richmond, Virginia struggled to solve the brutal rape and murder of 35-year-old Donna Doyle, they received word of another homicide. The victim, identified as 32-year-old Dr. Stephanie Harris, was discovered inside the bedroom closet by her husband. The scene was less than 2 miles from the site of Donna Doyle's murder. Her hands and feet were bound, and a cloth belt was wrapped tightly around her neck. She had been sexually assaulted. For police, the crime scene looked eerily familiar. There were no indications of robbery, and it appeared the killer had entered through a window. But few clues to his identity were found. The victim's husband explained that he discovered his wife around 2 a.m. upon returning from Maryland, where he was a law student. He had no idea who could have done this. He was later cleared as a suspect. Police sensed the 2 murders were connected. To find out, Chief Medical Examiner Marcella Fierro began examining Dr. Stephanie Harris. She found broken blood vessels in the victim's eyes, called petechial hemorrhages. Like the Donna Doyle case, that suggested Stephanie Harrison had been strangled slowly.
When the victims were examined, there were certain patterns of injuries that were common, and those patterns included evidence of restraint, evidence of strangulation, evidence of injury that took place over a period of time, which was very disturbing because it would indicate a pattern of torture.
The similarities between the crimes led authorities to believe that the same sadistic killer had committed both murders.
When you do autopsies, you get some insight into the nature of the person who committed the crimes. It was apparent from the injuries, from the restraints, and from their physical findings that these were very cruel deaths and that they were committed by somebody who enjoyed doing it.
The biological evidence recovered from Stephanie Harrison was sent to forensic serologists. An analysis revealed that those samples and the ones collected from Donna Doyle shared the same blood type. Both were type O.
Okay, folks, let's fall in. Conduct.
Richmond police were certain that the same killer, dubbed by the press as the South Side Strangler, had committed both murders.
We've got the evening watch. Our target is
And having found no obvious connection between the two victims, it appeared he chose his victims randomly. They feared he would strike again. The question now was where and when.
Which is known as the River Channel.
They got their answer 2 months later. On November 22nd, 1987, police just a few miles outside of Richmond in Chesterfield County were dispatched to the scene of a murder. The victim, 15-year-old Dawn Chang, had been viciously raped and strangled in her bedroom. Like the other cases, the perpetrator had entered the bedroom through the window.
Here's what we got, the 8.
Strangely, investigators found a figure 8 painted on the victim's body. But aside from a few stray hairs, little physical evidence was recovered. However, the hairs were enough for authorities to conclude that Dawn Chang had been the South Side Strangler's third victim. Unlike the other victims, Dawn was a teenager. She was Asian, and she didn't live alone. In fact, her parents were sleeping in the next room at the time of the murder. They never heard a thing. They described their daughter as a typical teenager.
It's a recent picture.
Great, time for me to get back to work.
You have a lot of work to do?
Yes.
They last saw her the night before.
Go.
After dinner, Dawn said she had some homework to do and planned on going to bed after she finished. She said goodnight and went to her bedroom. The mother discovered her daughter's lifeless body the following morning. Authorities had a serial killer on the loose, and he appeared to be spreading out beyond the Richmond city limits. His ability to avoid detection led police to believe he had done this before. Desperate to generate a lead, Detective Ray Williams contacted police departments throughout the region, looking for any unsolved cases with a similar MO. Less than 100 miles away, in the Washington, D.C. suburb of Arlington, Virginia, he got a hit. There, Detective Joe Horgus of the Arlington County Police Department had several unsolved rapes and murders that went back nearly 3 years. The details of those were frighteningly similar to the murders in Richmond and Chesterfield County. 3 weeks after 15-year-old Dawn Chang's homicide, Arlington County Police had been dispatched to the home of Sandra Thomas.
Watch where we're stepping.
The 34-year-old woman had been discovered raped and murdered in her home. She lived alone, and like the victims in Richmond, she had been strangled with household items. From hairs and biological evidence recovered from the scene, police determined that Sandra Thomas's killer was an African-American male with type O blood. The other unsolved crimes in Arlington with a similar MO had been committed in 1984. At first, it seemed odd to Detective Horgus that the killer would suddenly stop, only to resume 3 years later.
He didn't stop because he's got a girlfriend. He didn't stop because he got married. He stopped because he either relocated, he's dead, and he's not dead if he's doing the other ones, or he's in prison.
Detective Horgus reviewed recent parole and probation records, looking for African-American males who were arrested in Arlington in 1984. Then he found something. In early 1984, a 21-year-old man named Timothy W. Spencer was arrested in connection with a series of breaking and entering and petty thefts. Though those were non-violent crimes, records also indicated he was identified as the prime suspect in a series of unsolved rapes throughout Arlington. However, he was never charged with those crimes. After serving 3 years on the theft charges, Spencer was paroled. And that wasn't all.
His probation officer here in Arlington knew that he was released from prison to a halfway house down in Richmond. And he was released about 2 weeks before the first murder.
If Detective Horgus was right, Timothy Spencer was now the prime suspect in at least 4 murders throughout Virginia. But unless investigators could physically link him to the crimes, he would remain free to kill again. Police in Arlington, Virginia had finally identified a suspect in a series of unsolved rapes and murders that spanned a 3-year period. And those homicides bore an eerie resemblance to a string of serial murders taking place 100 miles away in Richmond.
All right, here's Tucker's hams.
To find out if they were dealing with the same predator, Arlington County Homicide Detective Joe Horgus traveled to Richmond. There, he teamed up with Detective Ray Williams. After comparing the details of all the homicides, there could be little doubt that the same killer had committed all of the crimes. The detectives learned that their prime suspect, Timothy Spencer, had been recently paroled and was currently living in a halfway house in Richmond. According to the director of the house, the suspect was currently out running errands. Detectives asked to see the logbook that contained the times and dates of when a parolee leaves and returns to the house. According to the records, Timothy Spencer had signed himself out on September 18th, October 2nd, and November 21st. Dates that corresponded to the murders in Richmond and Chesterfield County. He had also signed out on November 25th to spend Thanksgiving weekend with his mother in Arlington. Arlington County Detective Joe Horgus realized that Timothy Spencer's mother lived just a few blocks from where the latest victim, Sandra Thomas, had been murdered that same weekend.
What are the odds that 100 miles away, our lady up here that's murdered, MO fits identical to theirs down there, and where's Timothy Spencer? He's up here at the same time. Too many coincidences just don't add up. What it adds up to is logic. This is our man.
A short while later, Timothy Spencer returned home. And police were there waiting. The suspected serial killer was taken into custody on suspicion of murder.
Hand behind your bed. He'll tell you just a second.
A search of his room at the halfway house failed to produce any hard evidence linking him to the murders. But on his bed, they discovered a drawing of a figure 8, similar to the one found painted on the body of 15-year-old Dawn Chang.
gonna show you a couple
Under
pictures
questioning,
here, so
Spencer admitted nothing.
jog your memory a little bit. See if you recognize these folks, okay? Do you know that person? No.
He claimed to have no knowledge about any rapes or murders.
Have you ever been to
And he denied drawing the figure 8 found on his bed.
Yeah.
Detectives sensed he was lying, and now they looked to the forensic evidence for proof. Hair and blood samples were collected from the suspect. At the Virginia Division of Forensic Science, criminalists compared the hairs taken from Spencer to those recovered from several of the crime scenes. The shape, size, color, and texture of the hairs were identical. Though Timothy Spencer had type O blood, so did millions of other people. For irrefutable proof that he was the South Side Strangler, examiners turned to a newly developed, more sophisticated type of analysis called DNA testing. The testing revealed that the genetic profile of the suspect was identical to the ones generated from the biological evidence left behind at 4 murder scenes. The chances that the killer was someone other than Timothy Spencer were nearly 900 million to 1. He was charged with 4 counts of murder. Investigators theorize that after randomly choosing his prey, Spencer, an experienced burglar, would slip silently through his victims' windows. Once inside, he raped and strangled them. Timothy Spencer was sentenced to death for the murders of Donna Doyle, Dr. Stephanie Harrison, and Dawn Chang in Richmond, and for the death of Sandra Thomas in Arlington. He was the first person in the United States to be executed on the basis of DNA fingerprinting. For Richmond homicide detective Ray Williams, the new forensic technology could not have come along at a better time.
Were it not for DNA evidence, Timothy Spencer would have never been convicted. See, when you put a case before a jury, the jury has to see, touch, feel, and hear. We didn't have a whole lot of things for them to see, touch, feel, and hear, other than DNA. And that DNA spoke for itself.
Some killers require no motive at all to commit their crimes. And for homicide detectives, identifying a suspect can be a challenge. In those cases, they must rely on the physical evidence to expose a killer who has set his sights on random targets. In a small town outside New York City, a woman vanishes. But will she ever return remains a mystery to both her family and the detectives struggling to find her. Dawn breaks at a New England hotel to reveal a body, a senseless murder brutally committed.
The denatured alcohol, the drain cleaner.
Any evidence left behind is scarce, and investigators must uncover clues most cannot see. A killer may strike in the middle of the night and hide clues well, but the police are always there, ready and working. And they will never give up when they're on the trail of criminals who decide it's killing time. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. In the foothills of the Catskill Mountains lies the village of Wurtsboro, New York. With a population of under 1,300, it is a quiet haven, only 2 hours, but a world away from New York City. On August 27, 1999, at the New York State Police Station in Wurtsboro, a call came in from out of state.
Martinez.
The caller was Tony Valentine in Lutz, Florida. She said she was concerned about her sister, Tammy Karen.
She normally calls me, as I said, once a week.
Valentine had not been able to contact her sister in 2 months, which was very unusual.
Yeah, I'll take her right to the house first and I'll call you back later on.
She was sure something was wrong.
Thank you.
Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Gil, how are you?
Good. I just want to run something by you. I just got off the phone.
State police investigator John Jones learned that Tony Valentine last spoke with her sister on June 27th.
She's worried because she hasn't heard from her sister, and she files a missing persons report at that time and asked us to check on the welfare of her sister.
Investigators opened a missing persons case and traveled to the Karen home to see if they could find Tammy or her husband. It was possible Tammy simply wasn't returning her sister's calls. At the house, they were met by Tammy's husband.
Yes, sir. I'd like to talk to you.
They told Hal Karen about the call from Florida, and he agreed to talk to them. He said Tammy had left him.
Hal Karen told me that he and his wife had been having some marital problems. He said that Tammy liked to party a lot. He was giving her money on a regular basis so that she could go out. And there came a point where she no longer wanted to be with Hal. Hal told us that he had cut her money off, and she became upset.
He said that on June 27th, they argued about her drinking and doing drugs, and he left the house to cool down.
He was gone for several hours. When he returned, Tammy was waiting for him in the kitchen with her bags packed.
Tam!
At that point, she just left the house in a small car, which he couldn't describe any further than being a small red vehicle, and that he hadn't had any contact with her since then.
He did not see who was driving the car. He said she had done this before, but this time he believed she would not return.
Frankly, I don't expect to, sir.
For Hal, the marriage was over.
Thank you.
As an adult, Tammy had every right to disappear.
However, she still had to be found because we had a missing persons case. Even though I didn't have any authority as a police officer to force her to go home or to make contact with anybody, it was my responsibility to find her and report that I had found her to her parents or her family so that they could have some closure.
The police ran a background check on Tammy Karen. Senior investigator Tom Scaleppi reviewed the findings.
The records check revealed that on several occasions there were reports of domestic violence in the Karen household, and it was determined that Tammy was the aggressor in each and every one of those incidents. Very unusual. It's not your typical domestic violence scenario.
Investigators discovered Hal had an order of protection against his wife, Tammy. They also checked Hal Karen's background.
He was in the Army, in our Special Forces. No violence on his part anywhere through there.
The investigators contacted Tony Valentine to fill her in.
Hello, Tony. This is Investigator John
It appeared that her sister, Tammy, had left on her own.
Talk to you maybe about that, see if we can... Tammy had called Tony and had told her that she was tired of married life and that she was leaving Hal. Maybe get some ideas.
The detectives wanted to leave nothing unanswered, so the investigation would continue.
All right, thank you.
There was a lot of footwork to be done, a lot of background to be doing on Tammy.
Troopers spoke to everyone who knew Tammy and followed up on even the smallest leads.
About Tammy Karen.
She used to work here. She was
Through the course of interviewing Tammy's co-workers at the diner, It was learned that Tammy was very friendly with one of the cooks.
Everyone knew the two were close. And several months before Tammy disappeared, the cook moved back to Canada.
She had made comments to several people that the cook liked her and that he had asked her to leave with him to go to Canada, and that she was considering this as a possibility.
It was a good lead, but no one knew where the cook had gone. With a subpoena, the New York State Police secured copies of the Karen's phone records. They discovered a call to a Canadian number in April of that year. Investigators needed to track down that cook.
We were able to make contact with him in Canada, and we were able to put to rest that lead. He stated that he had asked her to come to Canada and that she said she may, but that she had not returned to Canada with him.
The state police distributed a missing persons flyer in the Wurtsboro area and also in Tampa, the most likely place Tammy would have headed.
We had newspaper articles, we had TV coverage, all of which generated leads. All of them, unfortunately, did not pan out.
Investigators kept in contact with Tammy's worried sister.
As the leads started running out, it was explained to her that, you know, with Tammy's lifestyle, there's a good possibility she might have just up and relocated, putting her past behind her.
Tony insisted her sister would have called by now.
That she might have gone to Canada. I don't believe that she would do that.
But as time progressed, and it got longer and longer over the holiday seasons and birthdays and special occasions, it became more evident both to Tony and to myself that something had happened to Tammy.
Investigators felt one of two things had happened to the missing woman. Either she had drifted back into a life of drug abuse, or, even worse, she was no longer alive. Then, on March 25th, 2002, a man driving an ATV in a heavily wooded area near Wurtsboro spotted a garbage can. It was sealed with plastic, but something was spilling out. They were bones. He went for police. New York State troopers responded and sealed off the scene. They called in the State Police Forensics Identification Unit. Leading that team was forensic investigator Miles Anthony.
Our agency responded to the crime scene at the base of this large inclined cliff area off the side of the west side of the highway. There was a garbage can lying on its side, which apparently had been lying there for quite a while. There was a black garbage bag cinched over the top of it with a green cord. And it was tied with a knot that looked pretty specific. The knot had an elaborate locking loop on the one end and then a cinching system on the back side of it. It wasn't your standard knot.
It appeared animals had broken through the bag and scattered the contents.
At the scene, we observed the remnants of some clothing that had been on the body. There was also an engagement ring. There was a 20-inch gold necklace from there, which had a pendant on it of some sort. And a watch. All appeared to be female. There was some animal activity, and they had removed some of the contents, and there was a trail of skeletal remains leading away from the can.
All of the items were marked and collected. They hoped something there would help them identify the body. But investigators were beginning to believe that after almost 3 years of looking for Tammy Karen, they could now stop and start looking for her killer. In the summer of 1999, New York State Police began looking for Tammy Karen, reported missing by her sister. 2.5 years later, in the spring of 2002, they found a body in the woods of Wurtsboro. Bones were discovered in a garbage can that had been secured with an unusual knot. Investigators working the Tammy Karen case believed their search was finally over. The remains were found less than 2 miles from her home, where she was last seen. New York State Police senior investigator Tom Scalepi.
We surmised it was Tammy due to the proximity of the Karen residence, the physical features of what we could determine, hair, etc. It fit the description of our victim, but we weren't not 100% sure. That was our main focus, is getting the remains identified.
The garbage can and its contents, in addition to the rope and knot, were removed in their entirety and sent to the Forensic Investigation Center in Albany. There, examiners tried to find material in the bones from which to extract viable DNA to compare with DNA taken from Tammy Karen's family members. Assistant Director of Biological Science, Julie Pizzichetti.
When you have skeletal remains, the DNA will be degraded. So with a bone and a tooth, we would actually take a drill and drill into them to get at the marrow, which is where the DNA is. We would drill into the bone or drill into the tooth and remove a portion of the marrow and transfer it into a tube and then apply the chemicals that we use to separate out the DNA.
After several tries, they got enough marrow to create a DNA profile.
In this case, what we're doing is relational type statistics, where we're comparing the relatedness of the known sample from the family member to the profile we obtained from the remains.
Running the complex statistics, they got a hit.
And we found that they were related, and it was actually 25,520 times more likely that they were related than not.
To investigators, there was no doubt that the remains of Tammy Karen had been dumped at the bottom of a cliff.
You guys ready? Yep. 1, 2, 3.
Now, the question was, who put her there? Forensic investigator Miles Anthony turned to the olive green cord that had secured the plastic covering the can. The cord appeared to be military, perhaps parachute cord. The knot in the cord piqued the examiner's interest.
It appeared to be unique, and I decided to maintain the knot in its original condition.
New York State Police investigator Jackie Tamburello sent photos of the rope and knot to the U.S. Army to be inspected.
There was an officer at West Point who immediately recognized it was a knot.
Captain Mark Sheehan from the United States Army examined the rope.
We looked at it, and the first thing, obviously, being that it was what we label as 550 cord, obviously would initially indicate that there's probably a military link. Then secondary, we started looking at other things in the way it was fashioned. And that's when we picked up on the knot. It appeared that there was a bowline-type knot.
That indicated the killer was professionally trained.
We have a seared end. We have a configuration of multiple knots that basically turned into some type of tightening system. And in my mind at that point, this was not something that your average soldier went out and made. Obviously, the person that rigged this had an extensive military background, and I thought that they were either currently serving in the special operations community or probably had served in them prior to and were out.
Police knew the victim's husband, Hal Karen, had been in the Army's Special Forces. Investigators traced the cord through its manufacturer and learned it was only shipped to a limited number of Army bases at specific times. Investigator Tom Scalepi had his team compare those times to Hal Karen's military assignment records.
Coincidentally, Hal Karen was assigned to these particular Army bases during that time and had access to this cord.
By this time, Hal Caron had moved out of the house he once shared with Tammy. With the permission of the current resident, the forensics unit searched the place. Nothing of evidentiary value was inside. But outside, in the bushes, they found something.
Hey, Miles, you want to come over here for a minute? I think we might have something here.
We located a piece of the parachute cord behind the corner of the house where the garbage cans were stored. The cord appeared to be consistent with the cord that was on the can.
They brought the cord from the residence and the one found with the body to the Army Research and Development Center in Natick, Massachusetts.
The senior textile technologist examined both. He said they had consistent fading. They both had 4 strands, 2 light yellow, 1 green, and 1 white, that completed 1 piece of the filament. The technologist also pointed out that the ends of both pieces of cord had been heated over a flame. They had consistent twisting qualities and consistent charring, and it was possible that they could have been 1 piece at one time, although he couldn't say for sure.
Now, investigators hoped clues on the garbage can would identify her killer. Forensic investigator Miles Anthony could not find usable prints on the outside of the can. But Anthony noticed something the killer might not have.
On the side of the trash can was a colored adhesive that bared the name of the sanitation company that would pick up that garbage. On the back side of that sticker is an adhesive. Someone who had placed that sticker on the side of the can may have left a latent fingerprint on the adhesive side as they were applying the sticker.
On the adhesive was a single latent print. Police secured copies of Hal Caron's inked fingerprints from the Army. And now they needed to find out if Tammy's husband's print matched the one found on the garbage can that contained her bones. If they did, investigators believed they were finally closing in on her killer. In 2002, in Wurtsboro, New York, state police investigators found a garbage can containing the remains of Tammy Caron, who had been missing for 3 years. 1 latent print was recovered from the label on the side of the can. Investigators believed if they could identify the print, they would identify the killer. Forensic investigator Miles Anthony compared the print to that of Hal Caron, Tammy's husband.
I was able to compare the 2 of them and match the latent fingerprint that I had gotten from the back of the adhesive to the known inked prints. It was a positive match. It was an absolute match to Hal Caron.
Finally, District Attorney Stephen Lungin had enough for an arrest warrant.
This case came together ultimately as a result of forensic evidence and its examination. Fingerprint evidence, fiber evidence, DNA evidence.
They decided to arrest the suspect away from his house in case he had weapons inside. They knew that the former Army Ranger was trained to kill, and they wanted to avoid a volatile situation.
Officer will take care of it. Just roll the window
On August 6, 2002, New York State troopers took Hal Caron into custody without incident.
I'll just put you in the front right here. 41.
I do know something.
At Troop F headquarters, investigators John Jones and Jackie Tamburello interviewed Caron.
I still don't think you're telling us the complete truth. What I want to ask you to do is...
First, he denied any knowledge of his wife's death. When confronted with the evidence linking him to the body, he changed his story.
In fact, I think I probably
In his latest story, he describes returning home, finding Tammy Karen in the bathroom of their house, sitting on the toilet with her head in the sink, and appeared to have died of an overdose.
Stand up, please.
He said there were crack vials all around her, and he worried if he called police, he would be arrested for drugs. So he disposed of her body.
Step out this way.
The investigators needed to check the possibility of a drug overdose.
We were very lucky in this case. We managed to find what turned out to be her liver. The liver is able to give us a lot of information about her blood chemistry, and we were able to utilize that to determine her toxicological state.
Toxicologists at the Forensic Investigation Center reported slight traces of eccoline, a chemical byproduct of cocaine. But the amounts indicated infrequent use, weeks or months before death. It was no overdose.
I had to buy groceries.
Investigators believe that on June 27, 1999, the couple had argued, as Hal Karen originally stated. But during that argument, he attacked her. He probably strangled her. He knew he had to get rid of the body. It would fit in the municipal garbage can. He could seal it off with parachute cord and plastic garbage bags. He took her to the cliff a mile and a half away and dumped her. Hal Karen was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life. In New York, investigators had to navigate through lies and dead ends, revealing a brutal crime that at first seemed like no crime at all. But in Vermont, things were not so subtle. The town of Rutland is a small, working-class city nestled in a quiet valley in the heart of the state. It is the sort of place where everyone knows everyone else, and violent crime is rare.
Just falling asleep.
On April 19, 1998, Ethel Desmarais entered the Rutland Motel where her daughter Jane worked and found her lying motionless on the floor.
Don't touch her.
Oh, no.
It looked like someone had tried to burn Jane. She wasn't breathing. The motel owner called for help.
Vermont 911.
And the emergency operator immediately dispatched patrol officers and detectives.
5548, respond to the Rutland Inn on South Main Street.
Oh, I need to talk to you. Stand up. It's fine.
Although she couldn't believe it, Mrs. Desmarais knew her daughter was dead. Detective Chris Kiefer Chaffee responded to the probable homicide. Rare but not unheard of in the area.
It happens. We're not immune from all the other types of crimes that happen everywhere else. It just doesn't happen as often, which is what we're real thankful for.
By the time Kiefer Chaffee arrived at the motel, other investigators had secured the scene. But this case would be like no other the detective had encountered. The victim was her friend.
And I was advised that the night clerk had been murdered. Her name is Jane Desmarais. And I know Jane. I've known Jane for years.
What did you see?
Investigators took preliminary statements about the discovery of the body. Mrs. Desmarais explained she began worrying earlier that morning when she could not get in touch with Jane.
Burn marks on her face is what you're saying?
Yeah.
She called the motel manager,
At all, do you know?
Yeah.
then went to check on Jane.
On her chest?
Yeah.
That's when they discovered her daughter's body.
The counter you said?
Her mother, yes. And she...
The motel owner confirmed the story and said Jane was alone on duty the night before.
Everything was fine.
So does Jane usually call you just to check in with you, or do you call her?
Investigators moved inside to begin processing the crime scene. It was immediately clear to Sergeant Rod Pulsifer that someone tried to burn the body.
When we came into the main lobby, she was lying on her back on the floor. There were several cans scattered around her, which appeared to be chemicals, which had been thrown on her and appeared to have been ignited.
There was an awful odor in the air from the chemicals in the flesh that had been burned.
Despite the gruesome nature of the scene and a victim they all knew, they had to focus.
You have to stay on cue. You know that you're going to find the answer. You just have to listen to what your evidence is telling you.
So you want to finish photographing the overall general scene?
Yes.
I started processing by photographing. You always photograph the scene first.
After recording the placement of evidence, they began systematically collecting it.
We had recovered some pieces of paper advertisements in which there was a bloody palm print and what's called the interdigital portion of the palm. That was a significant piece of evidence.
All right. Okay, you see that blood stain?
Next to the body was a small blood stain, probably from the victim.
I noticed that Jane had a cut on her nose.
The killer might have gotten her blood on his hand, then touched the paper.
Probably about 5 foot.
Okay, divide that into about.
Hoping the killer left more traces behind, they dusted nearby surfaces for latent fingerprints.
I've got prints all over this countertop.
Detective Kiefer Chaffee collected the empty accelerant cans near the body. All items normally found in the janitorial closet. A can of linseed oil, wood cleaner, drain cleaner, and paint remover. They were flammable, but not combustible. So the fire was short-lived. At the front desk, the detectives found signs of robbery.
Partially opened. And it looks like he's...
Cash drawer had been opened. Some cabinet drawers in the back office area had been opened also.
From receipts, they determined roughly $500 was missing. It looked like the fire was not the cause of death.
On the victim, up around the neckline, there were markings that would lead us to believe that she had been strangled.
An autopsy would tell more. Trace evidence might have transferred onto their gloves, so investigators also placed them in the body bag for the medical examiners to check. Rutland police also needed more details from the victim's mother. Despite the unimaginable horror she experienced that morning, Mrs. Desmarais tried her best to answer all of the detectives' questions.
Jane's mother explained to us that she dropped her daughter off there that night, about 11 o'clock.
The mother came inside with Jane as she normally did.
Something happening?
Gate number 3 with Sheila.
The other clerk was ready to go off shift and cashed out. He reported one noise complaint, nothing unusual. It was like any other night, very routine. As was their custom, mother and daughter talked for a while before Mrs. Desmarais left around 11:30.
So what happened after?
She said there was nothing that would explain such a horrible crime.
I think it was around...
Jane's a very docile person, hard worker, led a very simple lifestyle. To have something like this happen to somebody, there was just no reason. There was just no visible reason other than the money that appeared to have been taken, and her maybe trying to stop them. But to go to the extent of the burning certainly baffled us.
The autopsy was performed at the chief medical examiner's office in Burlington. It confirmed the victim had been doused with chemicals and lit on fire. Minor hemorrhages on the neck and in the whites of the eyes revealed the cause of death, according to Dr. Paul Morrow.
The cause of death was asphyxia due to some form of strangulation. The examination didn't reveal a specific means. It wasn't clear from whether the assailant had used his hands or a ligature of some sort.
In any case, it was a gruesome crime for this quiet New England town. At the Rutland Police Department, investigators met to review the case and plan.
Approximately, again,
Most crimes in the area are solved quickly.
We're a small community, and you know your good guys and know your bad guys. So automatically, when something happens, you just start running a list through your head of the people in town that had the potential for doing something like this. However, the circumstances in this case, with the strangulation and then the burning, there was nobody that came to my mind.
There were no suspects in sight, and the first crucial hours of the investigation were slipping away.
That's when everything is fresh, everything is hot, and that's when you get your best leads and gather your best evidence.
Rutland police methodically interviewed everyone at the motel.
I'm not sure if you saw our cruisers out in the front lot or not.
Finally, they found two guests who had a promising lead.
There was a couple that came in about 11:30 that evening to just check in, spend the night. When they arrived, they told us that they saw a white male that was there in the lobby who had gone over and sat down at a bench across from the check-in counter. They said he wore blue jeans, jean coat, and a white cap.
They described him as average height, medium build, with brown hair. But their encounter was brief, and they could not describe specific facial features. Rutland police immediately put out a press release with the description, asking anyone with information to call it in. They had the bloody palm print and now a general description. But they always believed they would find the killer.
With the team that we had working this, I knew we were going to solve it. It was just going to take some time.
The cops of this small Vermont town would not give up. For them, it was personal. They would not stop until they found Jane's brutal killer. In 1998, night clerk Jane Desmarais was found murdered in a Rutland, Vermont motel. She had been strangled, then doused with chemicals, and investigators believed her killer had attempted to burn her. Investigators had a vague description of a man seen in the motel lobby with Jane. A description was released to the public. But their best piece of evidence was a bloody palm impression recovered on a piece of paper in the lobby. Rutland detective Chris Kiefer-Chaffee brought the impression to forensic laboratory specialist John Creighton.
The impression on the paper was the interdigital portion of the palm, and the interdigital portion is located below the fingers of the palm. And what she had hoped that we would be able to do with this is to bring out the existing ridge detail that is there and possibly develop more of the fingers of that impression.
To develop unseen fingerprints, Creighton sprayed the flyer with an anhydrous aerosol.
And anhydrous is used on porous items, and it reacts to secretions from the skin, amino acids, that are soaked into the fibers of the porous material, and an anhydrous reacts to those amino acids and develops a visible print on that porous item.
Introducing heat and steam from a household iron causes the reaction.
The fingers of the palm above the interdigital area were developed visibly.
He could clearly make out the prints of 4 fingers of a right hand. But there was more. On the middle finger, he noticed an irregularity that appeared to be caused by a wart.
I thought the aberration at the tip of the finger was a good additional item for identification purposes because of its uniqueness. You could eliminate someone relatively quickly just by keying in on that area of the finger.
Now, with viable fingerprints, Detective Kiefer Chaffee could eliminate suspects generated by the press releases.
What's your name?
We had an awful lot of tips come in, and we were able to approach some of those people, explain to them, look, we'd like to take your fingerprints. We had some prints at the scene. We'd like to eliminate you as a suspect. And they voluntarily came in, gave us their fingerprints.
But checking the prints of the people called in, as well as those of all employees and guests, was a tedious process.
Back in 1998, we weren't computerized. We did not have an AFIS system, which is an automated fingerprint identification system, so all of our comparisons were done by eye. So literally taking hundreds of cards and doing a comparison to what was found from the scene.
Despite dozens of man-hours spent checking the prints, none of them matched. It was a dead end. They needed to broaden the search.
We had requested a computer database search in all of the states that were currently on an AFIS system. We also went through Canada, had them do a database search, and we went through the FBI and had them do a database search. So we have literally compared millions of fingerprints, and we are not coming up with an answer. We have not come up with an identification. So that tells me this person has simply never been fingerprinted before.
5 days passed with nothing solid. Then, investigators learned the motel owner's son had a possible lead.
He came up with Robert White, who had worked there. He'd only worked for about 2, possibly 3 weeks. He'd been fired from the motel for sleeping in the lobby when he was working, really not wearing appropriate work clothes, dressed kind of shabbily, is how the owner's son put it.
You can just give us a call.
It wasn't much. Robert White was just a fired employee with no specific link to the crime.
He, like everybody else, was put into the pot and, following our methodology of the investigation, was put on the list to be contacted and interviewed.
White was not home when officers checked his apartment several times. Not unusual with people on investigators' lists. But he began to distinguish himself from others on the list by not returning investigators' calls.
We had gone to other places, people weren't home initially, left messages, and they contacted us right away. And he was one that didn't, and that raises an eyebrow.
Rutland officers traveled to Mendon, Vermont, to the last motel where White was known to have worked. One of the clerks there knew White, but said he did not work there any longer. She told police White had a temper and threatened her once. She said it had happened the year before.
I know it's none of my business.
The clerk knew White was married. One day she confronted him about the women he often brought to the motel.
Bring another woman here.
She said White got angry and even threatened to kill her if she ever said anything about it again to anyone.
Threatened to kill me if I said anything.
The clerk believed the threat was real. Investigators needed to learn more about Robert White.
Do you have the criminal record check that I asked you for?
They received the results of a background check on White. He had been arrested in Texas for DUI, although for some reason he had never been fingerprinted. Because database checks had come up empty, Rutland police believed their killer had never been printed. Patrol officers again went to find White. This time, he was home.
Yes, sir. Are you Robert White?
That's me. And we're investigating.
He fit the general description of the man seen in the lobby.
We're kind of doing a process of elimination.
Officers explained they wanted to speak with him about the murder of Jane DesMarais.
Eyewitnesses. We want to just interview.
Robert White admitted that he had known Jane,
Fingerprint samples.
liked her, felt really bad for what happened, and was willing to submit fingerprints.
We're just gonna sit down, Chad.
He agreed to come with him to the station to give the prints and talk to detectives.
He was following what everybody else was doing, being very cooperative and very willing to assist us in any way he could.
With John up at the
Detective
lab.
Kiefer Chaffee had eliminated countless prints over the previous 2 weeks, comparing them to the ridge pattern of the prints found at the crime scene.
Because at this point, mind you, this pattern is like, I see it everywhere. I mean, these 4 fingers, I could tell you the ridge count, I could tell you the pattern, I could tell you the classification. I mean, it was like, you know, second nature at this point, because I have looked at so many freaking fingerprints and compared them all.
When she took White's prints, her knowledge paid off.
I recognized the second finger that this pattern was exactly the pattern from my latents from the crime scene. So of course I'm now rolling finger number 3. I find the wart on finger number 3.
She believed he was the one.
I knew there was a break in my voice. I knew that my heartbeat at this point was, you know, climbing pretty quick because I'm recognizing the patterns. But I had to conceal that. I could not let him know that I was suspecting anything.
While other detectives took White aside for an interview, Kiefer Chaffee did a quick visual comparison. It looked good.
What I needed to do now was get these fingerprints up to John Crichton at the lab because he's certified latent print examiner and he needed to finish this. So I called John to let him know I was on my way, and he dare not leave until I got there.
After eliminating more than 100 suspects in the gruesome murder of Jane DesMarais, police believed they finally found her killer. Now they hoped forensic experts could confirm their suspicions and provide the proof they needed to put him away forever. 2 weeks after motel clerk Jane DesMarais was strangled and burned during a robbery, Rutland, Vermont police took fingerprints off former motel employee Robert White. Detective Chris Kiefer Chaffee had personally eliminated more than 100 sets of prints in the case and believed she finally had the right set.
When I left the office, I was 99% sure it was one and the same. But I'm not qualified to do it 100%.
All right. I think this is our guy.
She brought the fingerprints to forensic laboratory specialist John Crichton at the Vermont State Crime Lab, who had developed the crime scene prints.
And he was able to make the identification. So at that point, I called back to the station, said we've got a positive ident.
The detectives in Rutland received the good news while the interview was still ongoing.
Robert White, you're under the arrest for the murder of Jane DesMarais.
Robert White was arrested and charged with the murder of Jane DesMarais.
You say Canaan will be used against you for law.
Yeah.
Having these rights in mind.
He declined further interview and requested an attorney. He was held on $250,000 bond. They would have to go to court relying primarily on a single piece of evidence, according to Sergeant Rod Pulsifer.
What I would refer to as probably the crown jewel of the entire investigation was the fingerprint in the blood.
Not only did the ridge detail of the fingerprints match White's, the wart on the middle finger was the same. At trial, prosecutors told the jury what they believed the crime scene evidence proved had happened on the night of April 18, 1998. There was no sign of struggle. Jane DesMarais must have known the killer. When Robert White showed up, she would not have been concerned.
Late for a reservation, isn't it?
In fact, she had once covered for White when his cash drawer came up short. But if he took money from her drawer, Jane would have tried to stop him. Jane's body was found in the lobby. She must have confronted him there.
Though he perhaps didn't intend to kill Jane, I don't believe he expected Jane to put up such a fuss. That's Jane's personality. That's Jane, in and out. She's a wonderful woman, and she was very protective of the people that she worked for.
At some point, he knocked her against a desk, causing her nose to bleed. Then he strangled her. It would have taken several horrifying moments for Jane to die. Her blood on his hand, White leaned on the flyer, leaving the print. Frantic, he got the chemicals. And dragged Jane out of view of the front door. Trying to conceal the crime, he then doused her upper body, no doubt trying to destroy evidence. He lit the fire and ran. But the fire was short-lived, burning the victim's face and hands and little else. Robert Lloyd White was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. When killers strike, they leave their mark. But police are there to find it and make the criminals pay. Using hard-won experience, fierce determination, and forensic science, investigators do everything they can to find justice for the victim and the loved ones they leave behind.